The peaceful village became busier than usual that morning. People reported to the police early on, and they quickly arrived here to investigate a case that occurred. According to the person who reported the crime, the murder took place in the house directly ahead. The police department blocked the crime scene quickly. Boss Lu Feng and Captain Chow also put on gloves in preparation for an inspection. They were very attentive around the room from the moment they entered the door, because all murder cases would have clues from the surrounding objects. Boss Lu Feng commended the captain to split up to investigate. He would go inside while the captain checked around the house. Captain Chow examined the scene carefully, but there were almost no hints, so he returned inside the house to report to Boss Lu Feng. But the scene in front of him, that was both heartbreaking and frightening. On the ceiling right now was a woman who appeared to have hanged herself, and there was an odd detail. On her feet, she was wearing a pair of red shoes that were very intricately embroidered. Whereas her family was an ordinary farmer family who dressed very simple. Boss Lu Feng immediately called the person who reported the case to ask for clarification. Boss Lu Feng was curious as to how he was able to discover the body inside this house. Because the door was locked, it was difficult to see inside. He stated that he was always watching because he had a crush on the victim and he had not seen her leaving the house since a few days, so he was concerned. As a result, he leaned out the door to inspect the inside. While looking for the girl, he was discovered by two of her relatives. They thought he was a thief, so they confiscated him to get clarification. However, after explaining that he was concerned about the girl, he peered inside to see how she was doing. Her relatives were concerned after not seeing her for 2 days and came here to find out what had happened. When her uncle opened the door and walked inside, he panicked and was screaming while rushing out the room. Only then people rushed in to learn that the girl had hanged herself. After hearing him explain, Boss Lu Feng temporarily believed him and ordered the police to bring her body down. And didn't forget to instruct them to be cautious and keep the body in its current state for forensic examination. The girl's body was then carried out, ready to be returned to the police station. She was still wearing a pair of red shoes embroidered with red flowers. However, an elderly woman in the crowd was watching, and when she saw the girl's body, she panicked and her face was darkened. Because of her abnormal appearance, Boss Lu Feng began to keep an eye on her. The entire team met at the headquarters to investigate the case. Was it true that the girl committed suicide? And the people who were intimately involved were also the ones who discovered the girl's body. The boss directed to investigate all the people who were close to the girl, including the man who followed her. Captain Chow dashed out the door to inform everyone in a rush. They could find out the reason for the girl's death. The odd thing was that it could be related to previous hanging cases that happened. Captain Chow believed that these cases are out of the ordinary. "Sir, I believe this case was connected to a curse." Boss Lu Feng was taken aback. "Another witchcraft case?" Captain Chow explained to his boss what he had learned from the elderly woman who had reacted strangely the day before as soon as they started to go back to the crime scene. Before that, there was a girl in the village whose husband died young and was unable to work hard, so she chose to sleep with men to earn money. But she was discovered by a woman in the village. They came to beat her and scratched her face in order to prevent her from seducing men in the future. They shaved her hair and ruined her face, then abandoned her in the middle of the street. She then hanged herself in her house. She was already dead when people found her, and she was wearing the same red embroidered shoes which appeared at the crime scene recently. She seemed to die unjustly, so she left a curse on the wall. "If I become a ghost, I will return for revenge. All of the participants who abused the girl were terrified of the ghost's vengeance. Indeed, each of them committed suicide by hanging themselves. Especially when they die, on their feet were the red embroidered shoes that the girl wore when she died. Boss Lu Feng didn't believe this was the work of the devil. As a result, he directed the captain to look into the relatives of the girls who committed suicide to see if there were any leads. He reasoned that this could have been arranged by the girl's relatives. When she died, they might have exacted their vengeance on her behalf. After a day of investigation, the most suspicious person was the husband of the recently deceased girl. He used to sleep with the girl who was beaten by his wife. He was also the person next to his wife when she committed suicide. As a result, he was immediately taken back to the station to obtain a bow. He initially just played around and pretended not to be related to the case, but when Captain Chow became enraged, he was then obeyed to tell everything. He stated that he did not murder anyone. It was because the other girl's ghost appeared in the middle of the night and murdered his wife. His wife woke up in the middle of the night while sleeping and went off to bed. Despite the fact that he called, she did not answer. Suddenly he noticed a pair of red shoes floating in mid-air in front of his wife, and his wife was staring at them unconsciously. The shoes then moved as if inviting his wife to put them on. And, as being hypnotized, she wore them on her feet. She then began to get out of bed. He was so terrified that he couldn't move. All he could do was call out her name, which didn't work. His wife approached a wooden plank on the ceiling that a piece of cordage were tied on since. And then came what may, she began to fly up, floating in mid-air and approaching the cordage. And with that, she flew closer to the rope. Then she put her head in the noose. He was shocked when he saw his wife die so quickly before he could react. By the time his wife was hanged, he was about to take her down. Suddenly, a wooden chair appeared out of nowhere, striking him in the face, making him dizzy. Then, panicked, he looked in the direction of the chair. The sight in front terrified him. All of the furniture in the house was floating upwards. He was terrified to death after seeing that, and because the wound on his face was so painful, he stopped paying attention to his wife. As a result, he fled from home, unconcerned about whether his wife was dead or alive. He finally had the courage to return with a few villagers in the next morning. The interrogation was finished, and both Captain and Boss Lu Feng believed he wasn't the murderer. But what he said was unreal. They needed more concrete evidence. The two of them then went to the cemetery where the victim's body was buried to look for any clues. When they arrived at the location, they both sought out the cemetery keeper to inquire about the grave. This cemetery guard turns out to be the man who snooped in front of the girl's house the day he discovered her suicide. He agreed to lead everyone to her grave after a few inquiries. And Boss Lu Feng didn't forget to ask if anything out of the ordinary had happened recently. He also talked a lot about the girl along the way, but all of those clues were already investigated by the police. But there was one strange thing. He pointed to the girl's grave and inquired whether the cops had seen anything. Captain Chow simply stated that the grave was typical. However, Boss Lu Feng, who has extensive experience, discovered something unusual. He sat down slowly and picked up a cake that was being offered at the grave. And he informed Captain Chow that this cake was strange. Because this type of cake was only available in the neighboring village, the police had asked all of the girls' relatives not to leave the village while the case was being investigated. As a result, Captain Chow began investigating the cake's origins right away. He eventually discovered the only shop that sold this type of cake. Boss Lu Feng and the captain dressed casually and went to the site to look for more clues. However, the vending cart did not pique the interest of Boss Lu Feng, but the theater behind it with a large billboard made him feel more likely to find clues in it. There was a billboard outside the theater advertising a well-known magician. The show was taking place inside. Captain Chow was told by Boss Lu Feng to keep an eye on the magician. The two entered. The show had begun. Boss Lu Feng had a hunch that this magician had a problem. The magician started to greet everyone before performing a few small tricks. Then came today's most expected performance. It was about being able to make people and objects levitate. He managed to levitate all of his gadgets, including his co-star. Captain Chow was taken aback and jumped up, as the method was similar to that of the Red Shoes case. Boss Lu Feng advised him to be more cautious and keep an eye out for this magician in order to avoid waking a sleeping dog. The two people waited for him until he finished his performance. Seeing the presence of the cops, he also obediently put his hands in the handcuffs. He had no intention of covering up his crime at the police station, knowing that everything had been exposed. He maintained a calm demeanor while speaking. He admitted everything. He did it because he loved the girl and wanted all the others to suffer and pay for what they did. After that, he continued that those victims deserved to die, and that it was simply a poetic justice. In the end, he was sentenced to death for the murder of 3 people. Boss Lu Feng speculated that he committed such a crime because he was too enamored with the victim.